with pain, you will give birth to children. And it dawned on me that he didn't give her pains for childbirth. I will greatly increase. So the pains were already there. I love my mug. Wake, pray, slay. It's my motto. It's how I roll. All right, today, hear me. I have thought this through, and there are certain, not just topics, but ways of communication in Scripture that are just sketchy, I think is the right word, for the day and age in which we live. I mean, it's just, like there's certain things I don't know if you preach about on Sunday morning. This is one of those things. I'm just preparing you. So I got into a study years ago, and I was preaching part of this at actually teen camps and college and career retreats, because it was the result of Adam and Eve and their rebellion against God and what was taking place in their life, and opposed, that's like for 4,000 years how they lived like that, and that how that was remedied by the death of Jesus, and what was the curse of the fall does not have to apply to us. For example, Genesis chapter 3, verses 16 and 17, 18, and 19. I probably could have said 16 through 19. And this is the result of sin. Now you get up a little bit further than that. Verse 14, you've got Lucifer and his result, the serpent. But verses 16 through 19 is the result of sin as it pertains to man and woman. And I want to make a distinction. So in verse 16, and we might have this up on the screen. I don't know if we'll be able to do it or not with the length of the passage. But beginning in verse 16, it says, I will greatly increase your pains in childbirth. With pain, you will give birth to children. Let's set that one aside, because I just never dealt with that. Because God has said, I will do this. The result, check this out, the result of sin in verses 16, 17, 18, 19, as it pertains to women and men, the results of sin, their sin, it was self-inflicted harm over the next 4,000 years. Like, it wasn't like God's like, oh yeah, you sinned against me, it wasn't that. God's like, dude, what did you do? It's like you put your hand on the burned stove, look what you did, it's like you fried it. That's what's going on. And the results are self-inflicted. Verse 16, the rest of the verse says, your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. That's a result of the sin of Eve turning away from God, becoming self-sourced, operating out of her own intelligence, her own drive, her own leading and guiding, not led by the Spirit, not walking in intimacy with God. She's going to steer away from and make unwise, ungodly choices regarding men. Your desire will be for your husband. Her desire is supposed to be for God, and he'll rule over you. So it's like all of the women, like the oppression of women is from ungodly men and from ungodly women who get their identity in men, you know, like, and I've taught on all that. So we won't go into all that. Same thing with Adam. Everything with Adam is self-inflicted. So he goes on to Adam and he says in verse 17, you ate of the tree, listened to your wife, you tempted and presented that and you bought into that. He says, cursed is the ground because of you. Okay. And there's a whole element, which we can't go into now, where the authority that Adam was created with and his influence over the world, when he fell, the world suffered. It's all I can say is, like, you have an example of this is I drive down the road and I see a world that is like trashed. Like, there's trash on the highway. People are throwing cups out the window. They're just poor. Like God's not doing that. God's not tearing up our earth. We are tearing up our earth. Okay. This is that kind of thing. Cursed is the ground because of you, because of what you've done. Then he says, through painful toil, you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat of the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow, you eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and dust you will return. Okay, so verses 16 and 17, all the results of sin are self-inflicted, except I will greatly increase your pains in childbirth. With pain, you will give birth to your children. God did that one. Eve, I'm taking your pains and I'm increasing them. And I've never known what to do that. I'm like, dude, like that's, okay, I'm not saying this, but I'm like, that's kind of a jerk move, right? You know, I mean, with Adam, what's the deal? Like, why would he do that? An ungodly perspective would be like, oh, that's mean, you know? Why would God do that to women? And I was like, there's got to be a reason for that. It's not just like, okay, well, you know, hey, just random thing. You know what? You came and presented the apple. You know, hey, you know what? Birth pains are going to be, that's not what he's doing. That's not God. Come on. That's not his character. It's not who he is. So there's purpose for this. And I've never found it. Studied that for years. Started studying this back in 2002, I think. And wasn't my own intelligence. I didn't read it from a book. I heard it in prayer. I heard it from the Lord. So I just received revelation about it. And the Lord had brought back, here's the story. So where it began was we were in labor. My wife was giving birth to our second child, and I forget her name now, the coolest lady ever. She was just sassy. She was funny. She was just hilarious. She had my wife laughing, giving birth. Yeah. So it was like, she was the best doctor ever. And, but when she was walking my wife through giving birth, she kept saying, and Corinna had an epidural, but they did it different with her. And they were like, you know, we're only going to, partially, we're going to let you feel some of it so you can participate. Anyway, that was all the doctor stuff. And I'm just sitting there trying to keep it together, encouraging my wife. But I remember her explaining to my wife, she kept saying, your body knows what to do. And we've all heard that. And okay, she's a woman's body. She knows how to give birth. But she went a next step. She goes, all the muscles, this is what she said, all the muscles, and there's like 15 to 17 muscles from, not just in your abdomen and, in the vagina and the rectum, like there's like all of those muscles are used to produce a baby. And she was saying that, she said, your body knows, you know these muscles. And she said this, she goes, they're the same in giving birth, the same muscles that give birth are the same ones that bring pleasure to a woman. She goes, they're just greatly increased. And as soon as she said that, I remember hearing that and I was like, that is interesting. Never brought it together, never associated with this passage until this was back in February. And I'm telling you, like, I can only tell you that the Lord brought it back to my mind because I was teaching on your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you, as doing a thing for some college students. And we were talking how that's no more. And I read, I will greatly increase your pains in childbirth. With pain, you will give birth to children. And it dawned on me that he didn't give her pains for childbirth. I will greatly increase. So the pains were already there. Consider that. Childbirth pains before the fall were already there. Which means birth, having sex, producing children. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. I've got a whole video on marriage in heaven and sexuality and appropriate sexuality, and God created mankind and relationships, and all of that was before the fall. Like, this is after the fall. He says, I'm going to greatly increase, which means she had pains before the fall. Now they're just increased. So the whole process of birth had pains associated with them. Interesting, huh? And in that moment when I read that doctor came back to my mind whatever that is, 16 and a half years later. And I threw myself into study and called a doctor friend of mine down in Houston, called another doctor, awesome girl, won't give you her name, Wendy, and called her and talked with her and her husband. She's out in Kansas. I just talked probably 5 or 6 doctors. And I brought up what that doctor had said. And they were like, I don't know. I'm like, dude, what do you mean you don't know? You're a doctor. And so threw myself in research and talked to several doctors. And there are, like, when a woman is giving birth, she draws on every muscle in her body, one doctor said. Like, you know, she has her jaw muscles, she's drawing on those for giving birth, which he had some comedy. It was actually really hilarious. But like when a woman's giving birth, every single muscle from here down is used in producing that baby, including the pleasure muscles. When a woman has pleasure in intercourse, those muscles were involved as well. Here's my theory on this. Here's what I believe. And I believe it's beyond a theory. I believe that the increasing of the labor pains, which is what, like the doctor had said, those same pains for pleasure are now increased to give birth. That wasn't always the case. Those pains were lessened. And so I believe that God created women, and it was the greatest joy in her life to bring about a child in the world who would be a child of God in intimacy with its creator. And God changed that and inserted his will that the greatest horror that a woman would ever face is associated with bringing a child into the world who is estranged from their creator. I will greatly increase your pains in childbirth. With pain, you will give birth to children. Out of all the results of sin in verses 16 through 19, that's the only one God did. And there were pains that were before that were lessened. And because of sin, he increased those to magnify the consequences of sin, which was beyond just eating an apple. It was literally the effects of sin took humanity off the trajectory of living in intimacy with God, but we were born estranged from God. I believe that's that verse. And that's today's word from the Word.